So friends, welcome back to Opus Elenae, where we enjoy a non sequitur. It's been almost 2 years since I paid homage to Garth, and that will not stand. If you're new here, hi, my name is Courtney, and I am obsessed with the Old Kingdom books. It's a YA fantasy series about a family of necromancers who don't raise the dead, they lay them to rest. Reverse necromancers, if you will. There's a lot more, like how there are two countries separated by a giant wall where one has Edwardian-era tech and the other a more magical medieval vibe. One of the characters, Lirael, is a librarian in a perilous magical library. Dream job, am I right? And part of her uniform is a red waistcoat. I actually made a Viking version of her outfit a while ago, and I'll put a link on the screen if you want to check that video out too, but I wanted to do a more explicitly waistcoat version. And when I sifted through the old inspiration folder, I stumbled across this delightful going away dress from 1899. It's a smidge more flamboyant than I'm looking to make, but I wanted to take the overlapped closure and piping details and incorporate them. Everyone grab your cuppa. Today, in honor of the fact that it's officially spooky season, I have broken out the stash of Necromancer from Weeping Glass. If you've been watching for a year, then you've heard me rave about it at least once. It's a vanilla maple black tea that's, in my not at all humble opinion, vastly superior to pumpkin spice. Let's get into it.
First thing I had to do was gather my materials. The text references a silk waistcoat interlined with canvas, but I'm less likely to incorporate silk into my wardrobe, and anyway, silk is both expensive and warm, so linen it is. I also need to gather materials to make my pattern, since I've decided that instead of trying to find a ready-made pattern, I'm going to draft one from scratch.
It's been a long time since I've patterned anything modern. I've followed patterns, I've altered patterns, but I haven't drafted patterns from scratch in years. And modern drafting is a lot more complicated than medieval rectangular construction. Luckily, I have a solution. Craftsy, the sponsor of today's video. If you haven't heard of them yet, Craftsy is an amazing resource for all things creative. It's an online learning platform full of video classes on everything from baking to knitting to quilting to, you guessed it, sewing. All taught by experts who make learning easy and fun. For this project, I took Susie Furrer's classes on pattern drafting. I learned how to use my measurements to create a bodice sloper, and from that, the pattern that will form the basis for today's vest. I learned so much from this class and enjoyed it so much, I'm planning on taking the skirt sloper class next, so I have a full set of pattern bases. If all of that sounds interesting to you, I have good news. The first 1,000 people to click the link in the video description will get a full year of premium membership to Craftsy for only $1.49. Now, you have to be a new member for it to work, but it's a heck of a deal. Happy crafting.
Y'all, this class is intense. It starts out with taking about 90 incredibly thorough measurements, which are then added to a set of worksheets provided in the class. Those measurements are transformed, with the help of my old nemesis, math, into numbers, which are the basis of the draft. The first stage of the process is the moulage, which is a skin-tight bodice fitted precisely to the body. It's meant to serve as a base that the sloper can then be built from. Starting from a skin-tight foundation means less margin for error in the sloper creation later. I'm not going to detail the entire process, that'd take way too long, and Susie does a better job than I would anyway. From the moulage, I'll trace a clean copy with my handy-dandy carbon paper to make the sloper. This process includes opening up the neckline and armscye, adding ease to the body, and simplifying and consolidating darts, basically going from skin tight to body skimming. Once the sloper is done, I can make a pattern from it. I'll cut each piece of the sloper apart and reconfigure it into a princess seamed vest pattern before taping it all together and rounding off the sharp corners with my French curve. Then I'll make my first mock-up from an old bedsheet. I'm only making one half though, since this is just to catch the bigger adjustments that need to be made. I'll check it on my dress form and then on myself, which would be a lot easier if I had another person to help, and that's probably why I forgot to film it. It really drives home how much work went into this pattern, seeing all of the iterations laid out in one place. Now that I have the large adjustments, I'll make one more mock-up in heavy muslin, which is a game changer. I highly recommend it over the lighter weight kind. I'm making the whole thing this time so I can see how the entire garment behaves on my body. There's really not a lot of changes to make on the pattern itself. I need to lengthen the waist just a bit and take out a little in the back shoulder to eliminate the looseness there. And I can draw the shape of the waistcoat neckline and arm size directly on the mock-up. I'll trace the original pattern pieces, how many different kinds of paper can I use in one project, and use the muslin pieces to adjust them into the final pattern. Because the fronts are going to interweave, I'll need to make 2 different pattern pieces for them. I'll start by taking a tracing of the original front and draft out the tabs on that. Then I can differentiate the left and right sides by color and trace each piece off separately. Thank you to all of my current and continuing Ko-fi members. Your support and the support of all of my members and croissants keeps me going and makes it easy to provide quality content for everyone. Thank you all so much. Stick around after this brief commercial break for the waistcoat construction. I have just about 2 yards of this lovely cranberry red linen, and I probably spent too much time rearranging the pattern pieces for optimal layout, but that's okay. Instead of doubling the fabric and cutting 2 pieces at once, I'm going to trace each piece individually along the sewing line. The pattern doesn't have any seam allowance, so I'll have to make sure that I leave enough space between each piece to add allowance when I cut them out. The lining is a cotton linen blend that has a slightly stiffer hand than the red. That should give the waistcoat a little more structure without needing an interlining. I'm going to construct the waistcoat in a way that seems counterintuitive, but will make sense at the end, I promise. First, I'll sew all of the princess seams, front and back, and then the back seam of both fashion and lining layers. Then I will attach the front and backs at the shoulder, leaving the side seams open. Next, I'll serge all of those pieces as close to the seams as I can. If I trim the seam allowances down enough, I can get away with not clipping the curves, even on the front princess seam. Then I can stop and give everything a good press. I know everyone hates to iron, but I really do think it's the key to a polished final garment. I want the waistcoat to have black piping all along the edges, but I hate store-bought piping. It's stiff and hard to work with and shrinks when you wash your garment. So I'm going to take a rectangle of black linen, starch it for some body, and make my own bias tape. It's not as annoying as you'd think. In a nutshell, cut along a 45-degree line at one end of the rectangle, then sew that to the opposite end, straight sides together, so you end up with a rhombus. Starting with one of the angled edges, draw parallel lines as wide as you want your bias tape to be. I usually default to 1 inch. Then fold the straight grain sides, the ones with the ends of the lines, together, offset by one section so it forms a spiral instead of a series of circles. Cut along the line until you get to the end, and voila, a metric ton of bias tape. My camera ate the footage of making the piping, but basically I took some satin rat tail cord I had laying around, wrapped the bias tape around it, and sewed it together with a zipper foot and a long stitch. Once I did that, I can add the piping to the open edges of the fashion fabric, the bottom edge, the neckline, the front tabs, and the arm size. The side seams I'll leave alone for now. Marking the sewing line instead of seam allowance works really nicely as a guide for attaching the piping. I ended up attaching the lining to the fashion fabric by hand because I went out to Partners and didn't bring my sewing machine. I'm not mad about it though, since it enabled me to be really precise while sewing it together, much more so than a machine would let me be. I think the trade-off between slower sewing versus ripping out multiple times came out about even. After that is finished, I can trim down the seam allowances and cut away the extra fabric between the front tabs that I left to stabilize them. I'm going to clip those seam allowances, not serge them, since the curves are tighter and I really need the tabs especially to lay nicely. Time to turn the waistcoat right side out. To do that, I'll pull each of the fronts through their shoulder seam and out the same side seam, which will turn the back as well. Then I can use my bone folder to push out the tabs and corners, and it's back to the ironing board for another good pressing. To close the side seams, I'll pin the fashion layers with right sides together, lining up the top and bottom hems. Then, and this is the important bit, I'll sew them together, starting and ending about an inch into the lining layer. Then, when I straighten out those seams, the only opening left should be the middle of the lining layer, which I will stitch shut by hand after pressing again. Now to turn my attention to the buttons. I always figured I'd have to cover my own since I couldn't find any that I really liked, and I thought I'd use more of that black linen to go with the piping. And then I had the bright idea of embroidering the 7-pointed Claire star onto each one, because why not make this project take even longer than it already has? I set up my 8x10 slate frame with leftover linen, obligatory shout out to TF Woodcraft, this frame is the lacewood variant, and then I traced out the button guides with white gel pen. Then, and I am proud of this one, I used the bottom edge of the button form underneath the fabric and my tailor's chalk to mark out the design area for the star. I didn't draw in the whole star, just where the points intersect the circle, and I used my phone as a mini light table for that. For the gold work, I used DMC Diamant to make the star and then couched each intersection down with Coats & Clark metallic thread in gold. I had thought about using my real goldwork supplies, but they don't take well to being sewn through fabric as I ended up doing, and they don't make sharp corners well, and I didn't feel like plunging and securing 14 thread ends per button. When that was all done, I used the form to make the buttons, centering each star as best as I could. Then all that was left to do is make the buttonholes and secure the buttons to the waistcoat.
Thanks for sticking around with me today. I surprised myself with how well the moulage sloper pattern process worked to produce a well-fitted garment. It was a lot of work on the front end. I might insert some very light boning into the front princess seams just to keep the front smooth, but I'll make that decision after wearing it for a while and seeing how it feels. If you enjoy this channel and want to support it, you can do that monetarily on my Ko-fi or for free by sharing this or any of my videos with friends and social media. If you're looking to find an amazing community interested in history and crafting, come join us on the Discord at the link in the description box below. Until next time, be kind, do the work, continue supporting marginalized people, and keep creating. Hwyl!